Recording in progress.
Good afternoon. We're calling this study session to order. And our first order of business is called the audience. And I don't know if anybody filled out cards up there. No. Did anybody sign up online? Okay. Well, welcome everybody. So we'll move right on to our next item, 2.2, discussion and possible action regarding the current governing board advisory committees. And so we had talked to a few of the committees, and they told Wade and I some information when we had a 2-on-1 meeting with the chancellor, Wade and I with the chancellor. And so we invited Phil and Carlene and Dr. B to come and talk to us about their perspective of why these committees serve the college and possibly the board. So we wanted to hear from them also. Is anybody interested in, Jeff, you're going to start this? Thank you.
There's no, oh, there we go. Thanks, if you'll indulge me for just a minute. So as the chair was mentioning, one of the purposes for today was to have a conversation about, there's currently 3 board advisory committees, as you know, and just to kind of provide the really general framework. So you can very roughly divide committees into 2 categories. So one are board advisory committees. So those are committees that are established by a board motion, have members appointed for the purpose of giving recommendations to the board upon which it's going to make some type of decision. And one consequence of that is board advisory committees have to follow all the open meeting laws. So they have to notice their meetings in advance, they're open to the public, certain other requirements. The second other category of committees, and this is of course a very broad category, as it covers a lot of activities at the college, are what I'm labeling as college committees. So those are established maybe by the chancellor, an administrator, or maybe a group at the college like faculty senate or student senate. And those committees engage in a wide range of activities, but they're not created by the board. The members are not appointed by the board, and their primary purpose is not to make a recommendation to the board, right? It's to make a recommendation to chancellor, administration, or perhaps some other decision-making group of the college. So one choice that the college and the board have is, well, what kind of committee is it? Advisory committee primarily focused on advising the board, or college committee for some other purpose to inform decisions at the college? And then just the last thought I'd leave you with about that is, a college committee, even though its purpose excuse me, is not to make a recommendation to the board, certainly the board from its oversight role could ask a committee to come make a report. Well, tell me what you did this year, what were the major initiatives you worked on, and what were the outcomes of those. So the board certainly could get reports from committees or a committee chair, even if it's not a board committee, that wouldn't make it a board committee. So hopefully that distinction is a little helpful. So what we thought we would do today, I know different board members have different levels of familiarity with the 3 committees. So we have for each of those the administrator who is kind of the coordinator organizer for that committee, who can share some more information about the types of activities that the committees undertake and what they've done over time. And then at least for one of the committees, I know we have one of the community members who's also a member of that committee. We tried to have all of them here, but it didn't work for everybody's schedule. So at least for one of them, I know we also have a community member who serves on a committee who could also provide some background or answer whatever questions. So with that, whatever area you would like information on, hopefully we will be in a position to share.
So it's open for discussion?
Well, we want to hear from the administrators who are leading these. Phil Burdick, will you speak first about the committee that you were talking about, the enrollment and, yeah. because the information you gave to us in that last meeting, I thought was very interesting, and I would like the rest of the board to hear it also, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I start, let me introduce the chair of our committee, Mark Hanna, who chairs the Enrollment and External Relations Committee. As some on the board know, this committee is a rather new committee. It was just formed last year, and it was formed because obviously enrollment and external relations are a key goal of the chancellor, the board, and the college. And I think what the board at that time wanted was more outside involvement, another set of outside eyes on the programs the college is doing, not only marketing-wise, but also community relations-wise, external relations-wise, public relations-wise. And so we formed a committee, and the names of the committee are on the website. I think you'll find that all of them have either a marketing or public advocacy background. It's a very diverse committee, and I will tell you from working with them, they are not shy about giving their opinions about the college. And I think from at least the administrator's point of view, it's good to hear those outside voices because I think like many people here, I mean, we live in a bit of an isolated environment at the college, and sometimes we don't hear those outside voices that we need to hear. And so just they've been very helpful in kind of guiding what our key messages are, some of our tactics that we do. They're very familiar with marketing. They know what works in their community. There's a lot of Latino and Latina representation on that committee, and they have very strong opinions on how best to reach the Latino and Latina community with our marketing and messages. So they've been incredibly helpful to me as we move forward with all of our marketing and external relations initiatives. And so with that, let me turn it over to Mark Hanna, who's chair of the committee, who can talk a little bit more about the committee's work.
Thanks, Phil. It's so weird to be on this side instead of that side. Okay, so before I start, let me just tell you that this particular committee got created several years ago when we were really concerned, as you are now, about enrollment issues. And we thought, well, why not get some additional help in terms of what can we do about enrollment and what's happening with enrollment. So that was the genesis of creating the External Relations Committee. So our mission is to assist. We only review things and make suggestions only. Obviously, we don't make policy. That's your job. The Pima Community College Governing Board with oversight and monitoring of enrollment and external outreach issues, including marketing the college to prospective students. So we look at high school outreach and other institutions. What are we doing? What's the college doing to market to students? We look at overall brand awareness, as I know that you have done in the past in study sessions and board presentations about what do people think, what people know about Pima Community College. We look at outreach to new and traditional media, and I also know that that's been a big issue. How do you advertise? What do you do? Things have changed so much in terms of how you reach people these days. And so we review that, including contracts. So this last year, one of the major things we did was we took a look at the contracts that Phil presented to you, that were presented to the board for approval. And I know those are a lot of money, and to have another set of eyes. So my whole thing here today is just to tell you why I think it's important to continue this committee. So having another set of eyes, and in a minute I'll read you the members of our committee who are really qualified to kind of help you out and give you some suggestions and advice on what you're going to make the ultimate decision on. So we do that. We do community engagement. We make suggestions for events and opportunities. We outreach to federal, state, locally elected officials on behalf of the college. Now, we don't do that personally, but we try to set up some connections, and the members of our committee have some really pretty strong connections with some people in high places, as they say, and I think it's important that we be able to help promote the college with the people that are going to make some big decisions about the college. And we are reviewing current enrollment and retention reports. Phil reports to us at every meeting, current enrollment reports and retention reports, so we can take a look at what is happening and try to make some suggestions or do some work based on those numbers, as I know you do at every meeting. So here's why I think that our committee is particularly qualified to do all those things. Our committee members, along with our two board members, Luis and Greg, include Sabrina Lobato Gonzalez. She is the Director of Community Development, Big Brothers Big Sisters of Southern Arizona. You know, it's quite a large organization serving a lot of youth. Important to have that voice on our committee. Dr. Linda Arzamanian, she was the former Pima County School Superintendent, so she brings a lot of knowledge to our committee. Dr. Marla Franco, so many of you know Dr. Franco. She's an amazing, amazing woman who is involved in many, many things in our community. She is officially the Assistant Vice Provost, Hispanic Serving Institution Initiatives, University of Arizona. Matter of fact, she was the driving force that got the University of Arizona designated as a Hispanic serving institution. And you probably already know that Pima had that designation before the U of A. So, but she is amazing, just an amazing person. Julie Castell, Assistant Vice President, Community Relations, University of Arizona. She's been really helpful in filling us in. We would turn to her and say, well, how is U of A doing it? You know, when we have an issue, we're taking a look at enrollment or other issues, we turn to her and say, how do you guys do it? And she's been really helpful there. Rosie P. Garcia, the U.S. Office of Refugee and Resettlement in Tucson, a great help on underserved communities and refugees and immigrants who can obviously make great use of Pima Community College by enrolling here. Laura Shaw, Senior Vice President, Sun Corridor. I know you're all familiar with Sun Corridor, so there's the business aspect. What are we doing in terms of enrollment as it applies to producing people for our business community? And Magdalena Verdugo, she is the Chief Officer of the YWCA of Southern Arizona, another very dynamic woman who is involved in many things in our community, and me. So, and I have 20 years of using the exact services we're talking about, the kinds of things, meeting, I spent many years calling on the phone saying, please send a Pima outreach person to Catalina High School because we haven't seen one in a while. And so especially for students who are low income, first generation, immigrants, refugees, and undocumented students. So I think I bring that to the table in terms of our committee. So our committee, along with our colleagues on the Finance and Audit Committee and the Human Resources Advisory Committee, which I might just mention to you that those two committees were created, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's sort of in direct response to an HLC sanctions. When we were put on probation, those were two of the committees that we instituted to help remediate some of the issues that the HLC brought to us. So that's how, I'm pretty sure I'm correct about that. That's how those two committees got established. So we think that all three of our committees can play an important role in assisting the board. That's what we're here for, to help you, not to tell you what to do, we're just here to assist with your many responsibilities in governing our great college. It's my hope that you'll continue to utilize these committees as important resources for your work, including involving board members as integral parts of each committee. So I feel very strongly about that. And you might decide that maybe you only need one board member on a committee, or maybe continue with two, but I think it's really important that at least one of the board members be on each of those committees. And I know you have, you know what, I've been there and done that. And I know you guys have a lot of obligations, and you can't be everywhere all the time. But I think it's really important, and here's why I feel that. It not only improves the outcomes, because we get your focus on what the board really needs. You know, we can hear from the board member saying, well, here's what we need from this committee. We know all this other stuff. We got all this, we got this under control. But here's some things that we don't have under control, that we don't know enough about. So it's really important that that board member be there to help steer us in that direction. And maybe even more importantly is what it says to these members that I read to you, these important members of our community who are giving up their time, giving up their expertise to help our college. To have an actual board member at these meetings says, hey, we appreciate that. We value your time, your expertise, your initiative to try to help Pima Community College. So that's how I feel about the committee. I know we are doing good things. I know we can continue to do good things, and we're really at your service. So if you think about it that way, you know, we're open to you telling us, hey, this is what we think you should be looking at. So that's my speech. So any questions about our committee or anything?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, Mark, for the time you spend volunteering to chair that group, and Phil for your leadership in there. I'm wondering, I mean, I don't for a second, question its value, having participated in it in terms of bringing all those folks together, not at all. I'm just wondering about the choice. Well, the choice is up there for you guys. It's right here for me. Like, is there something theoretically, if you were a college committee instead of a board advisory committee, is there some part of what you just described that you felt like you couldn't do as a college committee?
Let me just put it on a personal perspective. I would just feel that it's sort of, I don't want to disparage the college committee, but it kind of lowers the value, I think. I think that certainly all three of these areas, finance, human relations, human resources, and especially enrollment at this time in the college's history, are pretty important items for the college. And so to just be a college committee, I think kind of lowers that importance of the committee, if you understand what I'm saying. Not that they aren't important, but.
Yeah, let me just add to that. It's helpful when recruiting board members to tell them that this is a governing board committee. You know, we tell them, we'll do a lot of the work. But I think, as Mark said, I think the fact that it's a governing board committee, the minutes are posted on our website, definitely elevates the committee. It makes a recruiting pitch a little bit stronger to get a committee members of this caliber to serve.
And do you feel like being bound by not necessarily the open meeting law part about not being able to discuss, but we've certainly heard a couple times about difficulties maintaining a quorum and being able to take action because you don't have a quorum, which leads me to my question: do you feel like having to follow publicly noticed meetings and have a quorum and all that is helpful to you, or is that a hindrance to you where you might not have to follow those rules if you were a college committee?
Well, first of all, we don't take formal actions. We're not a governing board, so we do make sure we have consensus when we want to bring something forward, but we don't take formal actions. And secondly, I don't think we've ever had a problem with having a quorum. I think we've had, all our meetings have been fine.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else? Wade.
So do you remember, Mark, when this committee was formed? When the board did take this action?
I think about 2 years ago, I want to say.
Yeah, about to, yeah, I
A
think
year and a half?
Maria was here, so yes. I believe it was about a year and a half to 2 years ago.
So could you tell me what you consider the most significant recommendation you've made to the board in the last 12 months?
I don't think, well, we actually haven't presented to the board as of yet. So we haven't made any formal recommendations. What we've been doing, what we've spent most of this time is trying to get our feet on the ground and understanding the whole enrollment procedure and what we currently have in place. And now, for instance, for our next meeting, we're inviting high school counselors to come to our meeting and tell us right to our faces what they're getting, what they're not getting. So we'll have a recommendation based on that. And we're also taking a look at retention issues. So I know you're all aware that we can do whatever we can to increase enrollment, and we've got a dwindling high school graduation numbers and those kinds of things that put a restraint on how many new people we can enroll. The real crime, I shouldn't call it a crime, the real sad thing is that we're losing folks who enroll and then they don't come back the next semester or the next year. So that's going to be a focus for this year. So we will definitely have a recommendation for you on that.
Just to add to that, so last year, and Board Member Taylor can probably speak to this, one of the most significant things that they did was recommend two very large contracts for marketing for the college. And I think that third-party endorsement of what the college recommended as far as our marketing vendors was very important, because they had to be vetted not only to the committee, but to Greg, who is Board Member Taylor, who was on that committee, and then to the rest of the board. And I think that's important when a board is considering contracts of this size, that there's someone else other than the administrator who's recommending it, that it's been vetted by an outside party to say, yes, this seems to make sense. And I don't know, maybe Board Member Taylor can speak to that.
Yeah, and that was a specific example of what I was saying earlier. I really do think bringing that group together, in my mind, regardless of whether it was either one of those things, the bringing that group together has a tremendous amount of value, for sure. So you definitely wouldn't hear from me a recommendation to not meet anymore as a committee. I suppose that's like a third option, right? If there was a third column there of options, it would be disband. I certainly wouldn't be recommending that.
Good. Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot about that. And as you heard from some of those members of the committee, there's some people that have some good experience with marketing and contracts and those kinds of things. So they were very helpful in our review of that situation.
So,
Dr. McLean, did you have more questions?
Yes.
Okay.
So in essence, you spent the last 2 years collecting information and data, familiarizing yourself. So nothing's technically come out of the committee directly to the board as a recommendation?
Well, the recommendation for the contracts, for the media contracts for last year were directed to Phil from our committee. We didn't make the suggestion directly to the board.
Just trying to get a sense of when this started, how it's going, and what's the reason to exist. So how do you evaluate the success of the committee?
That's a good question. I think that the way we can evaluate the success of the committee is when those recommendations are made to the board, whether or not the board feels that they're valuable. And obviously in this case of the contracts you did, because you voted for them.
So I guess the answer I wanted to hear was something along the lines of, we made this recommendation for a policy change, we made this recommendation for a company to provide XYZ, and this was last year's data, that's this year's data, and we think that that was a direct correlation between the recommendation we made to the board and the action the board took. Are we getting to that point?
We are, and I would love to be able to tell you that's happened already, but with the exception of the contracts, no, that has not happened. But we meet quarterly. First of all, we don't meet every month. We meet quarterly, and we have clear goals. So this year, we have set clear goals. Retention. We will be coming to the board with a clear recommendation on ways to increase retention at the college.
So one of the concerns I expressed originally on this committee structure was the need to have the committee members understand that these board members act as individuals and do not speak for the board. How do you ensure that they're not putting undue influence on the committee members to make a certain decision, and/or that it's clear that they're not acting in behalf of the board?
I think that's pretty clear in our mission statement. I mean, our mission statement clearly says assist. And I think that's pretty well understood by these are high-level committee members. They get it. They know that they're not there to make decisions for the board. They're pretty clear on that.
I think what Dr. McLean is asking is, he doesn't want the individual members from the board that are sitting on your committee to negatively impact people from being able to speak openly and honestly about what they're doing on the committee, what they want to do. He doesn't want, since board members, he doesn't want us to be bossing everybody else. And he doesn't want the committee to believe that the board members that sit on these advisory committees have any board authority to make any decisions or do anything, because we're not acting as the board, we're acting as an individual who's part of the board.
And a follow-up to that comment is, as you stated, the reason for these committees to exist is to get external feedback. Well, if you put governing board members on the committees, it's not very external.
So a couple of things, and I think Board Member Taylor can tell you, I don't think this committee is intimidated by anything. They speak their minds whether a board member is there or not, and they speak it pretty plainly, and I think he'll agree with that. I think having a board member there listening to external feedback, unfiltered, is helpful.
I go back to my previous comment that that's not helpful unless the entire board hears that. So for you to give feedback to a board member doesn't cut it for me, because a board member is one person. The information needs to go to the board. If the board is going to ultimately make a decision on a recommendation, they need to hear that information, not a board member, because you're assuming, I guess, that the board member either understands or speaks for the rest of the board, which is not the case.
Understood, and I think that's why it's important that when board members serve on this committee, on any committee, that they report back to the board on what they've heard and whatever feedback that they've given. It's to me, it's one thing if I report that back to you. I think it's a different thing if the board member serving on that committee and there's a protocol and a way that they do this on a regular basis. The board member on that committee reports back to the board, either through written documents as part of their remarks or some way that they have a regular schedule to report back what they heard from the committee to the rest of the board.
And, I would always also say that as my responsibility as chair is I'm making sure, and I've not been in this situation where anybody on the committee talk directly to the board member and says, this is what we think you should do. And I think I understand what you're saying, that it's muddies the water a bit, thinking that we have a board member, so we're going to convince them that this is right, or they buy into it, and they're going to come back and convince you all to do it. That's not the purpose of the committee. The purpose of the committee is just to make a suggestion. The board member is there to add input and to help guide us, in what you're really looking for. But we're not turning to the board member and saying, okay, this is what we think you should do. And again, that's the duty of the chair to make sure that's understood.
You're both saying a little different thing here. One is expecting the board member to do the reporting. The other is wants to make sure that we know you're not asking the board member to make a recommendation.
Real quick, let me just mention that I think one thing that we're going to be talking about today and voting on is that we're going to add an item to our agenda where we will have a 5-minute section for board members to report on their committees if you met in the prior month. And so each of the 3 committees meets quarterly, so there'll be basically 12 short reports in a year. And that will close that loop, that full circle, so everybody on the board will be hearing what's happened. And one other thing that we can do is we can just include the minutes from your committee meetings in the information item or the information that is included in our board packet, so we can just see the bullet points of what was discussed, what was decided, and what are future plans.
You don't need a board member to do that.
I just don't see a board member coming back from a meeting and being at a governing board meeting and say, okay, I have a motion based on what I just did at the committee. I didn't envision that, at least I didn't envision that as being a responsibility of a board member serving on the committee.
I didn't mean that. I meant that we may have a motion today in this meeting.
Right, I understand that,
to
but I mean,
add the reporting from the board. Yeah, I don't think board members will ever call for a motion, because that would be like we always do things when we get information from the chancellor and from the different departments that are impacting, and they give us reports, and it's usually in the consent agenda, but it's one of those kind of things.
Yeah. Again, our mission is to provide information and perhaps suggestions on how, identify a problem and have a suggestion on how to fix that problem, but not to make a motion, not to say, okay, this is what we think you should do, and here's the way you should do it.
That would be a recommendation.
But it wouldn't be, it would be a recommendation. I mean, obviously, we wouldn't be doing a job if we didn't make some kind of recommendation on how, if we identified a problem and didn't at least give you a possible solution, that would not be doing a job. Why would you have a committee that did that? But we wouldn't put it in the form of, okay, we think you should take this back to the board and make a motion that this happens. You should share this information with the board and let the board decide.
I think I've studied this one enough.
Thank you both.
All right.
Question.
Okay, Luis, I'm sorry, one more question.
It's not a big question, it's just a general comment on behalf of the committee. I think, as you know, Mr. Hanna, that the committee was formed because the issues and concerns reference to the enrollment, also to the retention that's been going on since day one, since we got here 5 years ago. But there has been established patterns prior to that as well, too. And that was one of the things that, as board, when we were on the board, we were very vocal on it, that's what we needed. That's why this came about as well, too. I think it's imperative for the board to know the specifics, but more important, the facts, the real facts, the true facts, reference to what is going on as well, too. Coming back, initially, what I saw when I agreed to it seemed like there's a little twist, reference to open to relations. I was looking more as a community, meeting with the community as well too. I think that's one of the, and I'm going to continue saying that, because I think it's very important. If we're going to be having committees, we need to let the stakeholders know, our parents, our students know out there as well too. I do realize that I know a couple other people that are there that I work with through Chicano por la Causa. Magda, she's a very good friend of mine as well too. But I think it's one of the issues that that I've said before prior to this commission being set or committee. It's the marketing. I know that the marketing, it was mentioned about 11, 12 times already, but it was an issue in reference to the budgets because we did not have the students back then. But more important, the percentage of the marketing, was it going to be outside or is it going to be in-house? There were several questions that we need to look at as well, too. But along those lines, before this commission was saying is that coming back to the marketing, Pima College is the only college, public institution here in the southern Arizona. There's no other. Compared to the Maricopa, we have 12 or 15 up there. But I think we are an established group. I think the college has done a lot in recent years, more in reference to what's been out there. And I hope to continue that. But more important, looking back in reference to the enrollment, we also, I think the board needs to look at what has been the phases in reference to new full-time students as well too. Coming back, was mentioned a while ago about the high school students as well too. There is a lot of students that begin as freshmen. I think that's one of the areas that we need to look at. Begin as freshmen but do not complete as seniors. Why is that happening? Why is there an established pattern at that? But it's nothing new. It's something that has been going on for years and years and years. But I think is with more constructive, more comprehensive information, maybe we can share that with our stakeholders. And that's what I really would like to see. Have that information, not only to the board, but the stakeholders out there, the community, la comunidad that we have here.
Well,
thank you.
So our committee would appreciate if you have very specific things that you think the committee should be looking at, please make those recommendations to us and we can do that. And again, the committee members, you can see, are not a bad representation.
I'm
of the
not saying
community.
there's a bad representation. I think it's a good group.
And we're inviting high school counselors to come talk to the committee. So there's like a direct connection to what Pima is or is not doing. So I'm not sure what you're saying there. I think that we're on the same, I think we're kind of on the same wavelength.
Coming back to the high school counselors, I do have students that I know that are in the various schools that it could be better. Like I mentioned before here, and we'll continue to say that, we can always do better. And that coming back to the K-8, to the K-12, to the post-secondary as well too. But even with the university, I'll say that to anybody. I think it's we need to really come back in reference to providing the best as we can, and we will, because those are our constituents, those are our students, and those are the kids that we, hopefully from the K-12 system, will come up here to Pima. Thank you.
Thank you all. Okay, and now let's go back to the second committee, the Human Resources Committee, and I believe that Carlene Thompson is via Zoom. Is that correct? Okay, so Carlene, if you'd like to share some of your thoughts with us also, thank you.
Thank you so much for allowing me to. The HR committee, I think it was created prior to my joining the college, but my understanding is, as has been mentioned previously, it was created partially in response to the HLC review and the prior full review. And it was created to review developments in HR and address issues in a discussion format. So we have several outside committee members, experts. Paul Bellows, who is a consultant in the Tucson area, but is known nationally for his consulting work in HR management, organizational development, training, and Dr. Helena Rodriguez, who is the Senior Executive VP of HR for University of Arizona. Our internal, our board member committee members are Dr. McLean, Luis Gonzalez, who has joined us all the time. And also my understanding is that, Madam Chairwoman, you will be the alternate and available for upcoming meetings. So some examples, well, let me go through our typical meeting format. We generally meet for an hour and a half to, we've had several meetings that were close to 2 hours based on discussion. Our format or our construct is generally presentations in a PowerPoint format for 15 to 20 minutes, allowing for discussion and questions afterwards. The presentations are by my office and the three main directors of the department, the director of class comp, the director of OED, which is organizational development, and the talent management, talent acquisition director. Things that we have discussed and presented on include retention at the college, recruitment and recruitment practices, flexible work challenges. The class comp study has been center stage for several meetings, all of them. Emerging training and development programs and orientation at the college. We have had, as a result of our discussions and our coalescing, we've had some great board and committee member recommendations. These include from committee member Luis, increased job fairs and making a more particular effort to increase employment opportunities for Indigenous and Native Americans. We now have an average of 5 to 6 job fairs a month, but some months we are higher than that. Our outside expert, Dr. Helena Rodriguez, talked a lot in response to our class comp study and just compared some of the challenges we had and some of the successes to developments and things that had gone on at the university. So that would be some of my comments and an overview of the committee.
Go ahead, Maria.
Hello, Ms. Colleen. My question is, do you understand why this committee was established, the reasons for it? And number 2, how many of meetings have you had did not have a quorum of committee members? And 3, what were the reasons for establishing this committee based on the HLC requirements on what they found at the college?
Okay, starting with the reasons for the committee's inception. The HLC findings, there were findings that involved procedure, following procedure, gaps in procedure, procedure as it related to hiring, interview, recruitment retention areas. There were findings regarding the addressing internal issues, whether these were management employee issues, issues in how policy would have been applied relative to the employee relations issue, and how those were addressed consistently or inconsistently. So those are some of the major reasons. And the second major question was about the quorum. We have had a quorum at each of the meetings during my tenure. We had one meeting where we did not have a quorum at the beginning of the meeting, but we continued on. A committee member joined subsequently, and we had a quorum. But in the record, there was a question or a comment made. It may have been by General Counsel Sylvan. I don't remember exactly who said it, but there was a question as to whether or not we had a quorum. For perhaps 15 minutes, we did not have a quorum. I don't know the exact time that, we fulfilled the requirement, 15, 20 minutes, we had a quorum.
So the other part was the recruitment, okay? So there were issues on recruitment. Do you have any idea as to policies and procedures being followed per HR? Recruitment, what improvements have been made with diversity?
Okay.
And how many of those have been, resolved?
Sorry. So focusing on recruitment and diversity. Prior to, and I can't frame this in terms of exactly the committee's role, but I can tell you now we have a strong functioning EEO area. Part of the class comp division or area of human resources also includes the affirmative action EEO standards reporting and activities area. Previously, that was contracted out to an outside entity, and primarily, I suppose we could say their role was just to put together a plan. So that has all been brought internal to the HR department. We do all the work now ourselves rather than an outside entity who perhaps, had the expertise but was less involved with the activities and the culture of recruiting and EEO standards at the college. So that's being done internally. As a result, we're not just doing a plan, we're doing individual reports for each member of ELT. Each major division head receives a report that lets them know, where any gaps are. Also, we fully inform them on the level of assistance that HR can give. One area of this assistance, which I have sort of referenced earlier, is our efforts in the job fairs. And we encourage hiring managers to also attend if they would like. And we also have, through the development of a additional area, which is our employee relations department, we have developed coaching standards. We have developed an area that is adept at resolving issues involving just from day-to-day management issues to some equity issues as well.
Hi, in terms of the actual function of the committee, you had listed off a number of recommendations that the committee had made, which sounded good, don't get me wrong, but they all sounded sort of like operational recommendations to the college in terms of how those operations could be improved. Can you give me an example of recommendations the committee has made to the board in terms of things the board should be doing to impact human resources at the college?
I don't know that this committee has made any direct recommendations to the board. I don't think that has happened. They make the recommendations to within the committee structure, and then as an official committee, all of the discussion and presentations, et cetera, are posted up, but I can't say that they have made a direct board recommendation, Board Member Taylor.
Thank you.
I had a little trouble understanding you. Will you tell us again how many members are on this committee?
Oh, okay. So we have two board members who are on the committee. You're on the committee. Board member Luis is on the committee. Chairperson Real is an alternate, or as of recent will be a sort of substitute person if someone board side can't make it. And then we have National Consultant Paul Bellows and VP of HR Helena Rodriguez, Dr. Helena Rodriguez.
And yourself?
Yes.
So there's a total of 5,
Sorry.
2 of which are board members. So theoretically, if you and 2 board members got together, you had a quorum for a meeting. Is that correct?
I'm not sure about your question. I guess it would be correct.
I think the committee needs to be a lot bigger.
We're working on that.
Okay, thank you, Carlene Thompson. We appreciate you being here to share with us your thoughts and what the committee is doing. And then our last committee is going to be Dr. Dave B. with the Finance and Audit Committee.
Good evening, Chairperson Real, members of the board, Chancellor Duran Serta. It is a little bit of a mouthful. I need to change myself to say it. Happy to give a quick overview of the Finance and Audit Committee. Our chair, Scott Odom, wasn't able to make it tonight, so I did talk to him about this. His schedule wasn't able to fit it in. So quick overview of the Finance Audit Committee. It is the longest standing formal board advisory committee. It's been in existence since around 2013, so almost 10 years, or about 10 years now, and is an active and frequent. It meets about 6 times a year. The idea is about every bi-monthly, give or take, and then as special needs pop up, there might be additional meetings that happen. The charge of the committee is it's an interesting structure that we set up because the charge is actually under the purview of the committee itself. So it can actually change and make recommendations to the charter. So if they think that they should be emphasizing a particular point, they can make that recommendation, make the charter recommendation changes, and then that goes to the board for approval. That has happened a couple of times over the years, just to focus the attention. So the key areas that they look at are basic financial oversight. That includes annual reporting, financial metrics, things like that we've talked with the board about, as well as talking about the budget and getting feedback related to the budget. They also they do oversight of the college's investments and risk management and audits. That's both internal and external audits. What it really creates for the board is the ability to dive in a lot deeper in detail for various financial matters and some of the nuance related to audits, related to things like that the college needs to follow up on with expertise. from around the community. So what we try to do, and I'll actually answer a couple of questions that just came up related to the HR. The structure of the committee is 2 board members. I serve as staff. I'm ex officio, non-voting on the committee. And then there are 5 to 8 members of the community. The HR committee is 3 to 5 external members, and we are in need of additional members. And as Carlene mentioned, we're recruiting right now to get additional members on that. We currently have 5 members on the Finance Audit Committee. We are also recruiting, and we have a couple of prospects that we're going to be adding to the committee. They have a rotating term, so it's a constant challenge to keep the board where you have people who have been on it for a while and knowledgeable, and then you're bringing new people in. And so that's also outlined in the charter. Basically, it just gives the ability for that committee to dig in, and for the members of the board who will sit on that committee to dig in more deeply. It does a couple of other things that are more formal, and why it makes more sense, I think, for this, or makes sense for this particular committee to be board advisory, is because it has a direct connection to the State Auditor General's office. And they come in, they issue reports directly to not only the board, but to the board advisory committee members. So those go straight from the auditor to you all, and have the ability to go into executive session with that committee, so that the committee then can get reassurance. That follows Sarbanes-Oxley best practices, which is where this committee really came out of, was trying to create a committee that followed some best practices from Sarbanes-Oxley outside of things that were not required to have this kind of a committee. It just follows some of the best practices and gives the ability for the members of that committee to talk directly with the auditors to get assurance that there weren't any hangups, that the college was cooperating, was providing information freely and thoroughly, that sort of thing. That just gives an extra level of assurance to the board that we're following best practices. That's why it's it's the first one of them, and it was modeled after other similar type enterprises that are outside of higher education. If you don't know Sarbanes-Oxley, it's what got the Enron debacle, when Enron went down and it took out a couple of the major auditing firms. Some of the legislation that came forward required the creation of these kinds of committees. It doesn't apply to the college, so that what we did is we sort of borrowed some of the best, most applicable elements of it to create this committee for the college. So that's the basic overview. If you have any questions, again, and with the HR one, I just wanted to throw in the way that committee is. It's a little bit smaller, and it does create a little bit of challenge in terms of logistics. I will also add the logistics of following public meeting requirements are a little bit burdensome. Once you do it a number of times, you still have that, but I'll give some examples that it is not an infrequent conversation when you're naturally having a committee discussion and the committee's asking questions and they're interested and engaged. It might go off of what's been agendized. And then you have to corral it back and say, whoa, that's off topic. We'll have to come back and address that at a following meeting. There are some true logistical challenges when you're looking at this. There are advantages to the right side, my right side, for as opposed to having the public meeting version. I just wanted to get that out there. I sit in on the HR committee. I'm not on the HR committee, so I'm there most of the time, not all the time.
Is there anything in terms of the implementation of those best practices or what the committee might advise that you do now as a board advisory committee that you couldn't do as a college committee?
The one thing that I would say, and I was trying to make that distinction, where with the Finance Audit Committee, I think having that formal structure is valuable, that it creates another level of assurance, another level of transparency and accountability, and gets that direct connection with the auditor. If that committee was a college committee, that wouldn't be a requirement. They would do that directly with the board. You would continue to get the direct feedback from the auditors. But what I would say, if you shifted that one to be a college committee, I would say that the board should probably have probably 2 additional, or during executive sessions, have a couple of meetings that you don't currently have specifically with the Auditor General's office. That would just be one change. It's not that hard to make that change, but that would be a change I would make. With the others, you know, I think that, notwithstanding former board member Hannah, I think that there is some merit to having it be, you know, perceived of as a very high-level committee that has feedback at a very high level. I think that the clunkiness of it and the formality of it doesn't necessarily lead to the freest exchange of information, because you have to be a little bit careful, right? You can't go too far. You agendize the topic and then a natural conversation happens and you have to pull it back in. That's an awkwardness that wouldn't happen with the college committee.
We feel the same way.
And Dr. B is actually talking about me, because the last committee meeting, I did bring up something that was way off track, and he had to remind me, so thank you.
We're
it might
quite
not always
practiced.
be me, but
It happens. I mean, but it happens because of inquisitiveness, right? It's like, oh, well, you say something and you trigger a thought, and then it goes down this other path, and it's like, okay, well, we might be going too far. Let's pull that back in.
thank you, Dr. B. So 2 things were brought up when we met, and the first one was what I mentioned, that we are going to, if there's a vote and we all agree on it, include that in our board agenda, that we will not, I mean, let's try not to talk, the committee meetings are 2 hours. We don't want us to talk for 2 hours, but just, a couple of strong bullet points about what's happening, what's in the future, what's on your radar, what help does the committee need from the board or from the college, just to keep us abreast of what's happening. So if anybody is interested in having that, we could have a motion and a second, and then we could have some discussion on that. Or not. I thought it was a good idea. I think the administrators on the committees also thought it was a good idea. So we're going to have to, it's basically, if you're on the committee, somehow you should share what you learn and hear with the rest of the board. So we can either do it in a one of our regular scheduled board meetings, or just, quick email about, hey, here's what's happened.
I just want to say that most of the information that we do on the Finance and Audit Committee is presented to the board. We have our, the finance, Dave B. presents as finance, he presents the audits. So I don't feel that the Finance and Audit Committee needs to report, because it's already being done.
So maybe if the board doesn't want to do that, maybe we could have the committees do a presentation if there's ever anything important that we need to hear. Okay. And then the second thing that was brought up, it wasn't a for sure thing yet, but it was a suggestion, is I wouldn't mind being an alternate if one of you can't attend your board meetings, your committee meetings. Let me know, if you're going to be out of town or something like that. And I thought it would be sort of just a very, easygoing, familiar thing, not super strict. But I was told that in order to be on the committees, it has to be a board mandate that there is an alternate if one of the duly elected committee members of all of us cannot attend. So if anybody feels like, and by the way, it doesn't have to be me. If anybody else wants to be the alternate, you can step up and do that too. But is there any interest in making a motion, a second for that thought, an idea?
Could we maybe address what the committees are first, because it may not be necessary to do that if they're no longer board committees, and then circle back to that? I mean, we can do it first, but it just might be moot based on any subsequent discussion.
Yeah. I think that, from the finance and audit and from the enrollment and external relations, I think both of those committees have asked to keep it as a board committee. So I don't necessarily feel comfortable going against their suggestions to us. And I do agree that, Carlene Thompson might be having a hard time finding people to be on a committee. And if it's not if it's not a board committee, she might not have anybody on that committee. Yes, so is there a motion? Does anybody want to change anything and make a motion? We can have some discussion.
So I guess just so we have a motion to discuss, but if there's a second, I would move that the Enrollment and External Relations Committee become a college committee and the Human Resources become a college committee, and what's the other one? The Finance and Audit stay as a board committee. And I can explain why now, or we can go afterwards and I can explain more.
Second.
Okay, discussion. Go ahead, Greg.
So I totally hear, and the only doubting voice in my head is around that status issue. And so that is something I agree with, that maybe it makes it more difficult to recruit. The part that I'm stuck on, and the reason that I think we need to go that direction, is if you look at the definitions of what these committees are, those two committees are already operating as a college committee. I mean, outside of the open meeting law requirements, I mean, we just heard that all the recommendations for the Human Resources Committee have been to the administration or an internal college body. They have not made a single recommendation to the board about what we might be doing. They're already not operating as a board committee. The Enrollment and External Relations one has been doing a lot of work in advising, Phil's area, and it sounds like they were working on some retention things, but I didn't hear anything in there about recommendations to the board. Those, in my mind, would all be operational recommendations for the college. All of those are good. I'm glad that it's happening. It's just, it seems to me if it's a board committee, it should be there to make recommendations to the board. And if we're not in the minutia of, which we shouldn't be, in the minutia of, how the college is doing its marketing or whatever, because that's up to the chancellor and Phil and everybody else to decide, it seems like sort of by definition, by nature of the work that they're doing, that they are college committees and they're not board committees. And so for me, while I totally accept that the status thing could be an issue, that doesn't change in my mind unless the committees sort of fundamentally shifted the way they're operating, that they are operating as college committees, so we should call them what they are rather than have them mislabeled as a board advisory committee when they're not advising the board to do anything.
Coming back to enrollment, I know that we have a enrollment division in reference to addressing recruitment and retention. So is this board going to continue to be like an umbrella over them, or are they included at this point?
I think what Greg's motion and Wade seconded they would not be reporting to the governing board. They would just be reporting to the people in the college, the administration in the college. Now, that doesn't mean that we wouldn't get reports. Obviously, in our board packet each month, we get numbers about enrollment and things like that. So I think all of those reports will continue as they have been, but it just won't be, board members won't be on these committees if this motion passes.
Board members will not be on the committee, is that what you said?
Well, I don't think if they're reporting to us, I don't think board members are on any college committees. Is that correct? So yeah, we will not, the board members, if these committees are changed from advisory committees to the board, just to college committees, we won't be taking up a seat on the committees anymore.
So just to clarify then, Board Member Taylor was giving a motion about the Finance and Audit Committee continuing as a board Advisory Committee, but the other two committees would become college committees with no board members present, but could report to the board periodically at meetings, right?
Okay, then I have one concern that, well, I have many concerns, but mainly the HR committee. I don't serve on it, but I know there's a lot of issues in the college with employees and so forth that I'm not privy to. But I actually feel that there needs to be more emphasis in that committee. I don't know what the role is and who should take care of it, but I just feel that HR happens to be a problem at this college.
And in terms of our function, I mean, I agree with you. I don't see what I'm proposing here as the board in any way abdicating our governance role in terms of HR or in terms of enrollment. It's just that we continue to do that through the chancellor. So, I mean, we built goals for the, in partnership with the chancellor around enrollment. We have, I think, a study session coming up that's looking at, dispute resolution and all. So we still have all these opportunities to be involved in there. It just would allow those external groups to continue to advise the college and one of the things I didn't mention a second ago, one of the things we heard, and I had heard from some folks who are on some of those committees too, that the structure that's imposed on them by needing to follow open meeting laws does restrict their ability to have open conversations, and they have to remember to agendize something. And it's the things that we live with as elected officials, but that folks on those committees, I think, could potentially be even more helpful than they are now if they weren't constrained by all of that and could just provide input to the areas of the college. And so, and as I said in our questions before, I'm by no means should this motion be construed as a recommendation from me that the college should discontinue those committees. I think they're great. I mean, I would have a strong recommendation to continue them, just not in their current capacity.
I have to say I agree with what you've said. Yeah.
I just want to make a point. I didn't hear anything in the motion that said a board member could not go to one of those meetings. I didn't hear that. So
I didn't say anything about prohibiting board members from attending.
yeah, I thought I heard that.
Okay, sorry.
So I wanted to make clear that if we want a board member to have the opportunity to go to observe, they certainly may do that. And I want to make a couple of comments. I think I heard the chair of the External Relations Committee say that when the college was put on probation by HLC, which was done during a previous board, that's one of the reasons these committees were formed. And I also heard that from the chair of the HR committee that there were a number of things she listed that came out of an HLC report listed as concerns that were referenced to HR. And I would hope that if the reason these committees exist was to ensure that we're meeting the regulations that placed upon us by HLC, that's what their top priorities are. And otherwise, their current task is different than their original task. So if there's a list of problems that the college had that were targeted in certain departments, I think those should be made a top priority for resolution. And if that takes recommendations to the board, so be it.
There we go. Just a quick little clarification of the history of those committees. So external relations was.
So did I not hear correctly?
What I'd say is it's mostly accurate, but not completely the picture.
So I didn't hear it accurately.
No, I think you heard it accurately, but I'm not sure.
That's what I wanted to hear.
There's some subtle, it's like a subtle difference. So one is discussions and efforts to stand up a finance and audit committee started before the HLC report for the reasons that Dr. B was talking about. So
I didn't mention that committee.
So, okay, so just to know, so that one was there was more priority and speed put into standing it up after the HLC report, but that's not what caused it to be stood up. That was already in the works before. The HR committee was not required by HLC, which, and I just want to make sure that wasn't the impression given. HLC, in its report, placing the college on probation, identified a number of areas of concern, and then basically it's the college's responsibility, right, to figure out how are you going to address them to the satisfaction of HLC. So there were multiple measures taken in order to address the concerns. One of them was the creation of the HR committee. So the HR committee was an outgrowth, offshoot of that HLC report, and in the original, at the outset of that committee, the primary emphasis was on looking at were there measures the college could develop, report to the committee, which could then make recommendations to the board that looked at the general overall kind of how is personnel management going at Pima. So in other words, they weren't going to look at like an individual personnel issue or the details of how recruiting happened, but they would come up with a way to measure how overall is effective is recruitment. So for example, how many vacancies, how long does it take to fill them? So they were looking at kind of big picture metrics. That's kind of how it started. And then since then, I think there's been discussion of a number of other things that the committee might do, but hopefully that helps a little bit. That's kind of how it started and then sort of evolved from there.
So I've heard from somebody else. I was just trying to reiterate things I had heard from those people.
I just want to say that what I heard was that there won't be any problem when a board member wants to go visit one of these committees, these college committees happening. And just so you know, that's not the words we normally use here, right? Normally, the words that are used is that when a board member is present, and you know, we're talking about me, right? That the board member being there causes the committee to act differently, do differently. So are we sure that we want to say that we're changing these committees from advisory committees to college committees, but board members may attend? Is that really what we want to say?
Well, I mean, even though board members don't attend any of the other college committees, with maybe a few exceptions, I don't think there's any rule that prohibits board members from attending any college committee. So this would just make it the same as those. I personally have absolutely no problem if you chose to attend either the enrollment or the HR committees if they continue. Although I do think to be fair, I do think that our presence at committees can change the dynamic of those committees. So it's just a matter of, weighing the pros and cons, I guess, of being there.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, call for a vote. So the motion is to change the Human Resources Committee and the Enrollment External Outreach Committee to be no longer advisory committees, making recommendations to the governing board, but changing them to college committees. And the motion was made by Greg Taylor, seconded by Dr. McLean. All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, motion passes.
Madam Chair, I think then it would be appropriate to reconfirm who is representing the board on the committee.
The committee is myself, Teresa Riel, and Maria Garcia on the Finance and Audit Committee. Is anybody wanting to take one of our places? I mean, or is everybody okay with? Okay, so let's move on then to the next item in our on our agenda, section 2.3, discussion and possible action regarding the advisory committee for the Chancellor search firm selection process, including the appointment of members. have a quick question. It looks like the members on the first list are basically the HR committee, with the exception of Tracy Knuckles. On your mic.
I would suggest that we not select Tracy Knuckles. Part of the committee.
All right, I just have a joke. Are we discussing name? I don't know what we're doing right now. I don't know if that's a point of order or whatever it is, but I'm not sure what, are we supposed to be discussing names? Are we going to listen to a recommendation or
I think these names have been recommended to us.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I move that we appoint the members of the advisory committee to assist the board with the selection of an executive search committee for the position of Chancellor of Pima College as presented.
Is there a second?
Second, so that we can talk about it.
Okay, thank you. Discussion.
Okay, my opposition to the particular person that I mentioned is the fact that I respectfully think he's a great man, but my experience on one of him as a committee person was when I requested an audit, okay, it was given to the audit committee to do, and it had to do with the Attorney General, and it wasn't investigated the way it should have been. It appeared to me that that they just took the information that was at hand. So based on that information, I don't know. I just don't feel right about that one.
Maria, this is just, sorry, so I'm clear, this is something that happened while he was chairing the Finance and Audit Committee? That was, okay.
I would like to add my name to that committee also, if I might. And then I have reached out to a few former administrators from the college in presidents of campuses and director of human resources, and I haven't heard back from them. But if I do hear back in the next day or two, I was wondering, I don't want to say names just in case they choose not to commit, which is understandable. They're no longer with the college, but they, of course, did great service when they were there. So can we add people? Can the board add people as we move on? Like if we make a decision right now on a few of these people?
So the answer is yes. The only issue will be trying to do it fairly quickly so we can have the group start looking at search firm proposals. So as long as it's, so for example, like if people got back to you by the end of the week, I don't think that changes the timing much.
Madam Chair, do you have any idea what the, Jeff, the proposed timeline for the first committee meeting would be?
Well, as fast as we can get all of those calendars aligned. So that's the other thing, of course, is the more people we add, the more complicated that gets. But I think if we added a couple more people, I don't think that creates any significant obstacle to getting them meeting in the next week or two to start getting rolling.
So I would think that we should not appoint any new committee members if we have started having meetings. We should not appoint any new committee members if we've already started having meetings, because they're not getting the same information everybody else is getting unless you redo the whole thing and start over again. So it would not, I think we need to keep this thing as pristine as possible, and that would not do that. And we may be accused of, well, we don't like the way they're doing this, so we're going to put some more people in there and change the way they're doing it.
So I mentioned to the two that I called that I would expect to hear either an agreement to participate on this committee or to decline participation within the next couple of days. And I mentioned that I was hoping that this whole process would be done within 2.5 weeks. So that was what, so I think that they realize that they're going to either tell me yes or no within the next day or two.
And I would like to put the name of Soaring Hawk on the list as being on the advisory committee.
Are we confusing motions together? Sorry, there just seems to be a lot of, I'm not trying to discourage, I just remember, because Wade's original motion was as is, and now we've talked about adding, which, okay, we should talk about that. I'm just wondering, do we need to address the original motion and then discuss alternates? Because the original motion on the floor was as is.
Well, I would like to make a motion to include my name on that committee. Dr. McLean, will you allow that informal amendment to your motion?
No.
Really? Okay.
We originally, when we started this conversation, if I remember correctly, said that we were going to put people on this committee that had HR experience working in the sector where there were search committees that they had used over time. So we were looking for expertise in hiring or making a recommendation for a search consultant. And not just everybody has that kind of expertise. So if we're going to change that conversation to something else and just start putting people on there, I want to see resumes. I want to see their experience. I want to see which search consultants they've had success or failures with, and how they, we need more information if we're going to start doing that. And understand that we said that we're going to have expertise in working with search consultants, not just people that we think are good. The people that we just think are good, I think, should go on the next committee.
So Jeff, just for I had sent 2 or 3 names. I'm assuming that they either declined or didn't.
So there are other people who I didn't necessarily have a final answer from. So there may also be other people who in the next couple days put their hat in the ring.
So if we approved this list or some version of this list, Maria's comments notwithstanding, would we have to then have another motion at a subsequent meeting to add whoever is coming in after?
Right. So so let's say, you approve some number today, and then in the next couple days we get a few more names, then what we need to do is see, is there a time when we could do another meeting, which could be virtual, to just talk about those suggested additions and vote.
Call for the question.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Nay.
Nay.
Nay.
Maria, I didn't hear your vote. Nay. Okay. So the motion fails as it was stated. I know there's not a motion, but I'm going to take a point of privilege just real quick. It is one of the Board of Governors' rights and responsibilities to hire the chancellor. And I would be okay with not being on that committee as long as this board has the final say for the, I'd like this to be the same as the chancellor search, right? I'd like for us to be given, 2 or 3 names, maybe just 3 names of companies that do this. And I would like the committee to tell us why these are the 3 best for us, what the companies have done as far as, successful searches in the past for other institutions of higher education. And then I would be okay with not being on the committee as long as that is something that we can all agree with.
I think that's the agenda item.
So to clarify, I'm sorry if there's been any confusion about that. That has always been the intent. The reason for this group is to go through the larger pool of proposals, narrow them down to what they think the best proposals are, and come to the board with maybe they have a recommendation for a specific firm, but certainly with a recommendation for these are, I'm just making up a number. These are 3 firms that we think gave the strongest proposal, and these are the ones you should review, discuss, et cetera. So it was always the intent that the purpose for this group is to just narrow the field to the finalists to some reasonable number, right? So if we're going to start with 20 proposals, they're only going to bring to you, again, I'm just making something up, but let's say it's 3 to 5. That the board would then review those 3 to 5 or whatever the number is proposals. You might have questions. You might want to have we could arrange for a video conference with a representative from the firm, so you might be able to ask some questions directly, and then the board would pick the actual firm to award the contract to.
Okay, then, having been in the majority of that vote, I'm going to call back that question because having that been clarified now, I am okay to change my vote. I'm not sure exactly what that's called.
Consideration.
Yes, thank you. We're going to reconsider that motion. And do we need to have a second for that? I think so.
I believe so.
Yeah, would somebody second my motion?
Second.
Okay, any other final discussion? Okay, all in favor, so we're going to go with that list as printed, those 4 people. And I'm going to say, I'll take off what I had said earlier. I think that we should just move forward. I think 4 people would be a fine number to look through the possible selection companies for the candidate selection. And we should just go from there and let's put a timeline on it, like 2.5 to 3 weeks, that if they haven't met within the next 5 to 10 days, that maybe we need to figure out different people to be on the committee.
I would suggest we give them a little more flexibility than that and say 3 to 5.
3 to 5 weeks?
3 to 5 search firms
Okay.
for us to review.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. So the motion is to go with these 4 people and to have them present to us within the next 2.5, 3 weeks, 3 to 5 search firms to start the chancellor search. Any more discussion? Okay, motion made by me or the reconsideration of his motion and his second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Greg, I didn't hear.
Nay.
Okay, so passes 4-1 with Greg Taylor dissenting. Okay, moving on to our last item, 2.4, discussion and possible action regarding the advisory committee for the chancellor search, including the assignment of members.
So just to explain, excuse me, what's on the board on your paper. So these are individuals who are identified and recommended to serve on that larger committee, which would be the second phase. These would be individuals who would screen the applicants for the chancellor position and then again winnow the field down to some more reasonable number of those that they think are the most qualified for the position. What I wanted to, thought would be helpful to explain just so that this sheet makes sense is there are, you'll see there's a couple of organizations that are listed as that we wanted to have a representative from, but I don't have a final answer for who that is, with one exception. For the University of Arizona, I am fortunately pleased to announce, I just learned this today, but too late for this, Dr. Marla Franco, who's the University of Arizona Vice President for the Hispanic Serving Institution Initiatives, has agreed to be the U of A representative. Sorry, and I can't fit everyone on the screen, but hopefully that clarifies a little bit what the document is. And then as you'll see for some organizations, we don't have the selection yet.
So I think we have 2 options. One is to approve the ones confirmed and then come back to another meeting and try to fill in the rest of the vacancies, or we just wait.
Right, so the difference would be we do have a little bit more time for that because they're not going to start their work until you've picked the search firm, we've awarded them, and then they have a pool of applicants.
I move that we approve the members of the selection committee that are marked confirmed, and that we ask staff to bring back suggestions, recommendations for the additional vacancies as soon as possible.
Can I add that we should get a resume from the individuals that want to serve, additional people?
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion?
Could you restate for me the full motion? Was that two that we combined into one just now? I'm trying to figure out what we're voting on in a minute.
So the motion was to approve this list for the selection committee for the chancellor position. But the three that currently, or the four, excuse me, that have not been confirmed, five, I can't count, the 5 areas that haven't been confirmed, that we will make another motion in the near future to add those people to the committee.
Was Maria's an amendment to that? Sorry, that's what I was
And
trying
I
to
thought
figure out.
Maria's amendment was anybody that we're adding to the committee and adding to this list of people need to submit their resume.
I'll accept that as part of my motion.
Okay, and then, so are we going to be able to add anybody, like a community member? Or no, just this list?
I think the motion is for this list, except for
Can we make
if-
an amendment then to add a committee person, a community person?
So I'd say there's two ways you could do this. So one is you could do it now. The other is there will be more names. And so your requested additions could be voted on as part of the second group. So you could do it either way.
So just sorry, clarifying again. So the names that, assuming for a moment we approved this, so the names that we would submit for the next round of approvals, I originally thought, and maybe I'm wrong based on what you just said, that they would have to fit into the vacant slots that are on here. But the idea is that second group could be anybody we would want theoretically on the committee. Just trying to figure out what.
I'm not making the motion, so.
No, that's what I meant by restating. I'm trying to clarify exactly what the parameters are on this one versus the next one.
So the list that we have here, it appears that it comes from inside the PCC college community with administrators, staff, faculty, and then with all of the groups that are supportive of the college, the foundation, the tribes, the 2 tribes that we use, we're sitting on their land, their students are part of our student body, and then the universities and the schools, so the schools that feed into us K through 12, and then the college, and well, both colleges, right? And then the workforce and Pima County Business Group, the large employers, the small employers. So basically those are the constituencies. I think what Maria is trying to say is there may be other community members in our county that want to participate on here. I think that we all agree with this list, so I think we should approve this list first, and then other members that are going to be asking one or all of us to join the committee to select the next chancellor, that should be, I think that should also come up for another vote separate from this.
Yes, I'm following there. And so that by approving what's here, we're not limiting ourselves to like one person per slot. That's what I'm trying to figure out. If there was intended, like Maria mentioned another community member, so I'm assuming that would go under the community group heading, and there would be 2 people then under community group. So it's open, right? Like that doesn't close the community group category at that point if we approve those?
I think my motion said, and fill the other vacancies. So if you want to offer an amendment to say, and any other of the million people who live in Pima County can be recommended. That is up to you.
I'm not planning to do that. I just wanted to clarify that that was the intent, that these are set categories, and so any of the future names would have to be slotted as single individuals that fit into the missing categories and couldn't be additional members in any of these categories that are on here.
What'd you hear, Andrea? Is it just the vacancies on this sheet, or is it anybody and everybody? That's what I thought I said. So if we want to expand that, I would suggest you make an amendment or something along those lines.
So I'm not sure, unless you vote to limit it, if you're going to have a second meeting and vote anyway, that you can. I mean, I don't think you can prohibit a board member from making a motion at a second meeting about this topic from suggesting someone else to be added.
If I get 3 votes, I can.
If you got 3 votes, I suppose you could, right? But unless, I guess what I'm saying is unless that's explicitly part of your motion.
We're still building trust up here, so I want everybody to feel like if you want to bring another name, you can do it. So it would be appropriate to put it in there so we don't have an argument when we get to that point.
So I think the motion is to accept this list of the confirmed candidates right now, and then come back in the near future, within the next 2 weeks or so, and have the rest of the non-confirmed be confirmed, and then anybody else that the board members would like to see sit on the committee. And I'm assuming that Wade McLean will not let me sit on the committee, so we'll move on from there.
So I would make that part of my motion.
Luis, will you agree to your second? Okay. If there's no more discussion, let's vote on this. All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes unanimously. Okay. Thank you all. We're going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being here, and we're adjourning the meeting.